to anyone that's starting anything, whether it's in our world or any other world, it's all about listening. So when I'm talking to a very senior executive at any of these big firms, I mostly say to myself, shut up and listen. Just shut up. I'm listening for their pain points, their issues, their challenges, what they're doing about it. So if you're starting anything, listen, pay attention.
Well, hey, everybody. Wanted to welcome everyone to The Rising Tide. The Rising Tide is a series of key conversations with the leaders in really complex industries that have unique experience building and growing meaningful companies. Today, we're joined by Jack Sharry and Matt Nollman from a very unique company called LifeYield, who is, in my opinion, pioneered a new category that transforms how asset management works. And we'll get into all of that, what that means, but more importantly, how the heck they've grown a successful, meaningful business in a very complex, highly regulated industry. So really quick, we're in 2024. How would you guys describe what LifeYield does?
Well, I'll kick it off. This is Jack. With what we do, with what our software does, we look across a household of multiple accounts, often 4 to 7 different accounts, IRAs and taxable accounts and all that. And we suggest the optimal sequence for it to grow, to interact, to work together, to maintain the risk profile it seeks to maintain. And then over time, as it's time to make a withdrawal, whether that's an ad hoc withdrawal or a systematic withdrawal when you go to retire, we'll improve the outcome over time by 33%. That's a study by EY that looked at our methodology and said, we'll improve the financial results by a third over time by tax optimization. So that's what we do. And I'll just add a kicker. When it comes to bequest or the estate legacy, it's improves by 45%. So it's significant. And really what we're doing is we're avoiding paying unnecessary taxes.
So how did LifeYield come to be? How did it originate, and where does it sit then today inside that market?
So you said it right when you kicked it off, Judd. And that is that we are unique. We are one and only in terms of this ability. Others do pieces of what we do, but really what we do is we look across the full household, and our industry wasn't set up in the first place to manage at the household level. It was set up to manage account by account, product by product. That's really how the industry was founded. And how we got started was one of our founders, Paul Samuelson. His dad was the Nobel laureate, in fact, the first economics Nobel laureate to be named. He was an advisor to 5 presidents, started the MIT economics department, world-renowned economics department. And Paul and his dad used to get questions on the sidelines at soccer games when Paul, who's a contemporary of mine, his kids were playing soccer. So senior Paul and junior Paul would get questions about how to invest. And if you want to know how to invest, take a look at what Jack Bogle recommended many years ago at Vanguard, because he got that idea from Paul Samuelson Sr. The idea is to buy and hold and avoid paying taxes. That's simple. Buy an index, low cost, and invest forever until such time as you need to take it out. And that's where LifeYield came in, is that Paul and his dad recognized that all these baby boomers were now starting to retire. So how do you take money out? And so they came up with, and Paul in particular, Paul Jr., who's the software whiz and has developed our methodology. He got together with Mark Hoffman, the CEO of LifeYield, Michael Benedict, another co-founder who is is our CFO and head of all administration at LifeYield. They all got together along with another colleague of ours, Martin Cowley, who is our chief product officer, and they all got together, starting with Paul and his dad, but then made it real over the past 15, 16 years. Software that looks across households and suggests how to grow money more advantageously and withdraw. And just to give you an idea, we do this for firms like Merrill and Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Ameriprise. So we do it for some of the largest financial institutions in the world. We also have a tool capability that does it for Social Security optimization. So really what we're about is helping people have more money to accumulate over time and then to withdraw when it comes time to retirement.
That's awesome. So, and I've gotten to know you guys, Jack, over 5-6 years longer. It's been really fun to kind of understand the LifeYield story. And one of the cool things I think that has been fun to watch is the emergence of Matt Nollman at LifeYield and what Matt has brought to how you guys are growing. And help me unpack that, Matt, just a little bit in terms of your experience before LifeYield and then how you've come to help market such a complex thing that's used by the world's largest investment banks.
Sure.
But how do you go and take that story that's really difficult to understand unless you're in the weeds, and make it really understandable?
Yeah, thanks, Judd. Appreciate the recognition also. But I started my career really in tech marketing, and I think that fresh perspective of how to do marketing outside of our industry, coming into a company with, I'm really surrounded by industry veterans on our senior team. Everybody knows the industry in and out. Everybody knows how our product works extremely well. And since our product is so complicated and everyone comes from the same type of world, I think that the fresh perspective of just how to do marketing agnostic of financial services really started to come into play. And that's what let me try things a little more fearlessly up front and bring different ideas to the table that, fortunately for us, our executive team was really open to. And that's also part of the game. And in that, you can bring all these new ideas to the table and new perspectives. Like, you guys came to us to create a podcast, and our team was very open to the idea of doing that. And, within a few weeks, we had already kicked off and started our show. Typically in wealth management, these types of decisions take longer to make. They have a lot of more key players, and thankfully we've earned the trust of our team to be able to go out there and try stuff. In terms of growing our business in wealth management, being able to leverage the experience that Jack has and the connections that he's made in our business development opportunities through all the different marketing channels that we've been made so successful, I think really is the magic combination for us. Because I think that if we had an army of business development reps dialing for dollars, it wouldn't be nearly as effective as us putting Jack out there as a thought leader and making him essentially the face of our company, where now people approach us, and I'm sure Jack will attest to this, they approach him on LinkedIn and through various channels asking more about LifeYield and how they can get on our podcast. And so I think the combination of fresh ideas, having people open to those ideas, especially Jack and leading our marketing team here, and being able to employ those through a team that supports our decision making, I think it came together at the right time with the right set of experiences.
Yeah. Just to amplify what Matt just shared. Of course, Matt I only have about 40 years on him, so that's not always a good thing when you're in a tech company. And so I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, and what I don't know is what Matt knows. So Matt was able to school us, educate us. Judd too. I'm surrounded by people that are smarter than me, particularly around technology factors. But I've learned, and I've actually gotten pretty good at it, I will say, proudly. But going way back to when we started, when Judd first approached me about the idea of doing a podcast, our friend Harry Bartle, a colleague who's head of sales, said, "You can't do that, Jack. You're not a millennial." So 18,000 listeners and 40,000 downloads later, with a B2B focus and very narrow focus, I guess we've proved that old saw wrong, or young saw, whatever that might be. But what we did with Matt in particular, I just want to give a shout out to Matt throughout all this, is he basically taught us how to go digital. And we couldn't afford anything else, so we had to. And he gave us great guidance. And we'll talk some more about it in a little bit. But we call it surround sound strategy. You kind of can't turn in our industry and not see what we have to say about it. And Matt's done a great job of teeing me up as a thought leader. I kind of was one before, but I'm a lot more of one now because of his digital efforts. We'll talk some more about that. But very much a team effort, and we're a very small shop. This is essentially a four-person marketing team. A couple of us have other jobs too.
This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
I think the interesting thing is, and maybe it's a bit earlier, is LifeYield has truly become a category creator. And maybe that was because you were in such a niche category, but I think that the categories that I've put LifeYield in over the years have only expanded because of the way that you're the empathy that you have toward the market and how people are using it, and then the unique user stories that you can use LifeYield for. I'd be curious to hear, the perspective of that and how you've been able to kind of unpack that from working with Paul and others to like really say that this is this big idea. And I'll use one example that people may or may not be familiar with is this idea of a UMH, or unified managed household. And that idea, I remember spending time with Jack sitting in your office in Boston, and you're kind of workshopping this idea. Then I go away. I think we had a global pandemic or something in the middle, and I come back and everyone's talking about the unified managed household. And it's like something they needed to have. We need to solve for this. I'm like, you need to solve for the thing that Jack talked to me about in his office 2 years ago. And so, but it speaks to a real thing, but you really did forge a new category that was in the minds of the leading executives in our entire industry.
Yeah, I think what's distinguished this category creation, and I fully agree, we have created a category, it didn't exist before. But I'll go back in history. I'm a bit of a historian on our business. A good friend of ours and an investor in LifeYield is a gentleman by the name of Len Reinhardt, who wrote a white paper on the UMH, Unified Managed Household. He wrote it 24 years ago. At that time, it was the first paper that I can find that was written on the topic. And for those that may not be familiar with it, it's basically managing everything you own in a unified or coordinated way. Sounds like, of course you would do that, right? Well, the industry just wasn't built that way. All the systems, all the platforms, all the operations were not built for that. In fact, they were built to preclude that. FINRA and the SEC were against it for no other reason that you just bought one thing at a time, so you should regulate it one thing at a time. So we've been fighting an uphill battle for the past 24 years, well, 16 years, I should say, because we started in 2008. And so as we've gone along there, I'm not sure I got my math right there, but we did start in 2008. So in any event, bottom line is that we started to look at ways to help people have more money in retirement. That seemed like a pretty basic thing. But when you go to do it and then you go to explain it, as we like to say in Boston, it's wicked hard. And so the whole idea is, how do you make it simple? So that's really the battle. To your earlier question, John, about how did we grow? Well, it's around stories, and we can talk some more about that. But it's storytelling. We're in a business where it didn't exist other than the notion. In fact, when we first started telling people about it, people say, "Yeah, well, I want that. Yeah, how do I get it?" We've actually had to work with our largest clients, who are global, leaders, about changing the way they do business, changing the whole operation. It's no small feat. And they agreed that this is the future, but then the challenge was it would cost literally multiple millions of dollars. I want to say hundreds of millions of dollars to change. So that's the stream we swam up against. And so we had to tell stories, had to take off more bite-sized chunks to let people in a little bit. We're at a point, in fact, we're about to submit an article to a financial advisor magazine, which we do almost weekly in terms of the various articles we write about what's going on the UMH, and just talking about where we are now, because we're much further along, but still have far to go.
I'll add to that a little bit in that UMH isn't the first, we'll call it category, at least us on the marketing side, Judd, when we think about a category. This isn't the first category we tried to create. This might be like the third or the fourth. We tried a bunch of different forms of messaging over the course of time. We launched new products when we hear our clients and the people who we're selling to, who are we call them the architects of the financial advisory platforms that these firms use. When we talk to them, especially through the podcast, now that it's recorded and we can go back to these conversations over and over again, we hear terms and ways that they classify LifeYield. And we have our own ideas, of what LifeYield is and does, and that we maximize retirement income through investment tax management and Social Security optimization. That's kind of the cleanest way to describe who we are and what we do now. But when Jack and I first started saying, okay, who are we and what do we do? Because everyone's using different language to describe ourselves. This is probably the fifth try. And we ended up, as Jack said, unified managed household isn't a term that we made up and just kind of ran with the way that some category creation happens today. I'd say it's a term that we heard in a conversation with a client, someone who we respect, who's a friend of LifeYield. And we took that term and we said, wow, that really does, when we did a little more research around the company, that really does describe what we're after and what we help to enable through our technology. So we decided we wanted to own that. And what that meant from everyone's perspective was slightly different. So we kind of jammed it all together and said, okay, we're going to create a bunch of content around Unified Managed Household. We're going to have Jack on our podcast ask all our guests about UMH and why they think it's important. And after 150 episodes of networking and bringing up the Unified Managed Household at this point, we've planted a lot of seeds in a lot of different places that have grown into trees now of people saying, I think that Unified Managed Household thing is really the key. And while we were doing all this, we laid all the groundwork digitally so that when people search for the term Unified Managed Household, LifeYield comes up 4 or 5 different times in 4 or 5 different places. You know, a couple of mentions on LifeYield.com, a few from byline articles we've written in Financial Magazine, Financial Advisor Magazine, and Investment News, and even some research from Cerulli that we participated in helping with. So when you Google it, you can't miss us, and we have a lot of content pushing people towards the term. So it really does kind of feel like, after the longest time of beating the same drum and talking about it and us saying internally, man, do people even hear it when we say it? You know, we're getting feedback finally, the validation that I think we needed to say, you know, we just needed to stick with this a little bit. So I think it's the persistence over the course of a few years when, like you said, everybody went digital through the pandemic. We had to figure out a way to communicate purely digitally our ideas, and this is kind of how we did it. We kind of stuck to our guns and picked a term, Unified Managed Household, and a bunch of adjacent terms to it, and made sure that we owned the conversation both out in the market and on our website when people come back.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's definitely a spectrum, right? You know, Lynn can originate the term, and the science behind it, I think, is validated through all of that research and that white paper. But I think that is like a certain thing that just only certain types of people that are just slogging away at brand building can really relate to, which when you create a category, it's not like it's just a flip of a switch. It's like, I'm going to continue to have the omni-channel ownership of this idea because it matters. And because when somebody gets that idea, all of a sudden their world won't ever be the same. And that is the really unique thing about a UMH, is like, when I understand that everything needs to be oriented in this one construct, because once I do that, it will transform how taxes are managed and how the entire value of my relationship as a financial advisor with my client exists. Like that's kind of life-changing. And of course you wanted it. But then the mechanics, you know, have to be overcome, but that's where LifeYield comes in to make that really truly happen. So it's that to me is what category creation really is. It's that slogging away, elbowing your way into the room to like really make that happen, and it's persistence. And
well, you know, John, if I may, just I referred to it as hand-to-hand combat, knife in the teeth, just fighting your way through the mud, through the muck. All the people, our least favorite comment we would hear when we first started was, after giving our presentation, they'd go, interesting. Like, I think I just heard the world turn, and it's going to change, and I have no idea how you get there, but you're onto something. And then over time, and it took, frankly, our first major client took 8 years to sign up. It was Morgan Stanley. It just took forever because they had to change so much about what they were doing on their side, and you know, they're just not built for that. That's just not how any of these large firms operate. But I want to come back to something Matt touched on that I want to go even further than the podcast. The podcast has been the centerpiece, just so you all know, and you know, because we work closely with you guys. And really what's happened is we have now created a community, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So over COVID, we didn't travel, we didn't go to conferences, they didn't have them, they had them online, they didn't work. We participated like others, but it really kind of disappointing. And only recently have I started going back to conferences. I went to 3 over the past 6 months or so. Unusual, but there I was at conferences, at a CFA conference, at a Tiburon conference, and at a MMI conference, 3 industry groups. that are held in high regard. And I started talking to people. And one of the things that's interesting now, we've been doing the podcast for 3 years. We've had 150 plus episodes. We do it weekly, probably 48, 50 times a year. And we're in a dialogue. And one of the things we benefit from is our industry, sadly, all industries are just not getting the coverage they need. So we're a content creator, and we make darn sure that what we talk about is useful for the industry. Yeah, it's going to be beneficial to LifeYield if you listen carefully, but we're talking about where the industry is going. We're talking with people who are making that so. Judd, you've been on the show a couple of times. You got another one coming up because you have something to offer. You have something to say, and we make sure we get people like you that know what they're talking about, share their point of view. And so what ends up happening is then the word gets around. We have a very active social media effort. So once or twice a week, typically twice a week, we're out promoting it in some fashion or another. There's some earned media that comes out of that. We promote that. So very active social engagement. Matt does a wonderful job at SEO in terms of getting ourselves more highly rated or higher on the leaderboard in terms of what can happen. We do a monthly newsletter that I send out. That there's a mailing list really focused on C-suite executives that has an incredibly high open rate and click-through rate. And it's just a repeat of what we've already done. So the articles, the podcast. So there's a whole effort so that if you're paying any attention to our industry, you're going to see the stuff. We also do about every other month, I do a sort of Mad River Reflections. I have a home up near the Mad River in Vermont. It's a little more philosophical. It's a little bit more about human relationship because we talk a lot about the confluence of digital and human advice. We think that's really important. By the way, everything I'm saying right now, this is story time. This is what we do. We tell stories, and they happen to be real, and they happen to be true. And we're talking about stories about how to grow a business. We've got people, we're now at a point where PR firms are contacting us to get their executives on the show. We've kind of earned a right. And then a recent addition, I'll let Matt tell the story here. We opened up a new website called wealthtech on Deck. So Matt, why don't you fill them in on what we're doing with that? Because that's like
Sure.
right out of the gate.
I mean, with LifeYield and with building a serious brand around a subject that some could consider dry, we have to create a lot of deep content up front that explains what the things are that we do and the different terms that relate to managing taxes and kind of how we do it a little bit, and kind of have to peel back the onion in a way. What that did was have us very heavy on content of here's explaining how the watch is made, and here's how to see how other companies are using LifeYield. And what we didn't really have was too much top of the funnel content. So stuff that people can read and consume that isn't like explaining the different technology implications of using asset location or tax smart withdrawals or rebalancing, for example. So this platform that we created on wealthtechondeck.com has the podcast as the cornerstone. We're also going to add a blog and articles essentially, and be able to write articles from a third-party perspective about the industry, and really just help us become a media company for our firm and for our industry at large. I think that we have something to offer with the podcast, and it kind of started as a way to search through 150 episodes and try and, get those out of the depths of LifeYield's resources library into a place that kind of makes a little more sense. But it's evolved into us being able to become a publication and build a community around the WealthTech on Deck brand that we built. And I think that as an industry, I've seen this done outside our industry. An example that comes to mind within marketing is HubSpot and how they, have inbound.com, and they have their event Inbound every single year in Boston, and they've essentially created another top of funnel marketing publication that they now can have people contribute to. It's another blog, another industry pub that people consume and read all the time. And so, there's plenty of examples like that outside of our industry, but not a lot, if any, other ones that I've noticed in financial services. So we kind of, like every good idea in marketing, it's borrowed from somewhere else that has seen uber successful campaigns. So we kind of took that playbook a little bit and applied that to LifeYield. But in order to we couldn't just start that and have it be successful immediately. We had to build up a sub brand of LifeYield and WealthTech on Deck first. And since we were able to do that, that was able to evolve into this media platform that we're now creating, which I think will be one of the more successful things that we've put together over time at our company for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. One of the things I love to do is when I hire new people, I'll send them particular episodes that I think will give them context and help them understand, because Jack does such a good job of like context and history and understanding the names, not just the names, but the, actual relevance of that name at that time. Because they all change, these companies just, gobble each other up all the time. But I would love to see, selfishly, is if you give me like, hey, I'm hiring a new person in my investment team, like a packaging of certain episodes that would help tell that story. No new episodes, just the episodes with those people that help give this really cool, rich context. Mm-hmm. Hiring a new client service director. What should she know? Because the episodes are so good. And I want to be able to have a very turnkey like playbook to say, hey, listen to these 5 episodes on the Wealth Tech on Deck show, because it's the context and the industry spectrum is very, very useful.
Yeah, let me comment on that, Judd. That's a great observation. So how the wealthtechondeck.com started, Matt had the idea, and I'll be honest with you, I got a few years on him. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? What do we do with a website? We want him to come to LifeYield.com. Like, why would we want him to go somewhere else? He bore with me or whatever. And I'm a slow study, but I catch on. And it just became evident to me, particularly as I went to these conferences I mentioned earlier, where people I did not know. I've been around a long time, so I tend to know a lot of people just because of I've been around for multiple decades. Of course, there's a lot of people that weren't born when I started. So in any event, they come up to me and thank me for the episodes, that how important they are, to your point, Judd, that they find them useful. In fact, one of them at a MMI meeting a few years ago in Nashville was on a panel, was speaking about retirement and technology and all that. And a young guy came up to me and said, this is so useful. You shared all this history. Where can I find some? So we started a sort of a sub of Wealth Tech on Deck we call Legends of Wealth Tech. We've done a handful of episodes. We've got some more coming up where we go back to legends, people that kind of formed the industry and create the context, as you mentioned earlier, Judd. So we want to tell the story. It's storytelling. It's what we're doing. And frankly, unlike this podcast, which I'm talking a lot because I guess that's the job, on the podcast, I just ask a lot of questions. And I'll add some context so that just people can understand, because some of it I know our audience, some of our younger just haven't been around for all of it. So what happens is, and we're hearing this repeatedly at all the conferences I've been going to of late, people come up to me and thank me for them because they can't get this information anywhere else. And it is cutting edge technology of what we're talking about. All the technology, by the way, is not in and of itself cutting edge. It's the coordination of all of it that's the challenge, that's the difficulty. And so what we're able to do is we're able to then keep listening to our audience. So one final thought I'll just add. So we talked early on in this discussion around how important the audience is. And just something I've known for a long time. I've written a book on the topic. It's so important to listen to your customers, listen to your audience, who you're trying to target. We knew we were targeting C-suite level executives and what we call architect builders of platforms. That's who our target was. And if we thought if there were 500 of these folks out there, we'd be doing well with our podcast. Because Judd, you were the one that said you ought to try a podcast, and we all thought you were a little nuts, but we went along with it. Well, we have many thousands more of those folks, and they're not all C-suite. We still know that who our audience is that those 500 people. That's who we want to reach. But everybody else is paying attention, and LifeYield's brand has arisen. We are really a leader in that. And really what the wealthtechondeck.com platform is about is building community. So back to your original comment here just a moment ago, Judd, about packaging up. We'll do something like that because that's what we're trying. We're trying to advance the industry. And my experience is if we help advance the industry, you can't not advance the industry without what we do. In other words, we're part and parcel of the advance. That is what's next. So we just want to help the industry move forward, make the case internally, because we also learned early on through an exercise we did with a brand person, a consultant around branding. He said, the biggest challenge you guys have is that when the people that are sold on your idea, when they turn around and talk to colleagues, they don't know what to say and they don't know how to explain it. And we spent a long time, multiple years, I want to say at least a decade, trying to figure that one out. We didn't know how to talk about ourselves because it was too complex. And all this content that we've been putting out there is really designed to educate the marketplace. Because if you are an educated person in the marketplace, you're going to want to have our stuff. It's just we have great confidence that's going to be the case.
Well, it doesn't just educate the marketplace, it educates us. Because we're asking the same questions over and over again from all these different smart people in the industry. And everyone answers the question slightly differently. And eventually, we hear a lot of parallels between some of the answers of these really smart people. And we say, oh, unified managed household, that's been mentioned 3 times in the past 3 months on these podcasts by these smart people building platforms. Maybe we should capitalize on this term, or maybe this term makes sense. And that kind of education at the clip and the speed that we're able to do it at has been put a huge magnifying glass on how much we've been able to learn and take in and adapt to what people are saying and what's going on in the industry. I mean, truthfully, without this podcast and without us, creating content that involves our clients and partners and friends, we wouldn't have these types of discussions nearly as often, and we wouldn't be able to test out our marketing messaging, frankly, on all of these different people at all these different companies. So we benefit selfishly tremendously from all of these conversations, even though that's not really the main goal of our content. It's just like an ancillary benefit.
That makes sense. I'd love to hear a little bit about, it's from this idea, there's like a chasm that exists in my experience from marketing, from the story to the sale. How do we take these really interesting stories and a lot of like user stories, really like, hey, this is how I need to solve a problem in this context. How has this been able to impact just the sale? Like being able to understand, okay, like, helping people have already purchased in their mind before they even talk to someone in the sales department. How does that change through this whole experience?
That is a great question, and one we're still trying to figure out, but I'll give it a shot because we've actually made it work, and I can at least point to some things that happen. So we are creating a new category. Managing at the household level has not existed. The notion has existed. A white paper existed 24 years ago, but the ability to do it hasn't. And back to my earlier comment, when we first started telling the story, people would go, interesting. So really what we found ourselves is after we made our first very big sale, which was with Morgan Stanley, they believed in it. We had to find someone there, our good friend Rose Palazzo, who believed in the story and sold it to senior management. And they were inclined that way. Their strategy was inclined in that direction already. And so what we've done is we've just told the Morgan Stanley story. They're one of the fastest growing firms in terms of net new assets. And that's always back to story. So we tell the Morgan Stanley story and their success. And they're on the journey. They're not done by any means. And then as additional names came along, we would tell their story. And pretty soon there was this momentum and people want to be part of something that's happening. And because we're a weekly podcast, because nearly weekly articles in Financial Advisor magazine, because there's a couple times a week social media posts, because of SEO, because our website has case studies, because all this, we flooded the marketplace, not in a bad way, but made it available to understand what you do. So you go to our website, you're going to see case studies on what SEI did and what Morgan Stanley did and what Allianz did. All clients, it's all public information. We're not sharing anything that isn't public. And people are like, oh, so that's part of the catching on. But we all also, one of the real challenges of my career is doing enterprise sales. You know a little bit about that, Judd, but especially at these big firms, you're selling to lots of different groups. You got to go pretty high up to have someone who's in charge of lots of these different groups. As a colleague of mine used to refer to them as warring factions. So you're dealing with these very complex organizations and you're trying to get them to work together when they have no DNA around working together. So I don't want to say that this is easy. Our first big sale took 8 years, so that'll tell you something. And what we're finding is those sales are getting faster and faster because now the word is out that the smart folks are doing what we're talking about. If you look at what Edward Jones is doing, and it's in the industry press, they are talking about what we're talking about. And Wells Fargo is talking about what we're talking about. And I could keep going down the list. LPL is talking about what we're talking about. These are all the big names of our industry. And they're at varying stages of trying to figure it out. And so a lot of our content right now is to help them understand, because we know that as they get educated. So back to your question, Judd, so how do you make the sale? It just takes a long freaking time. It's really how it works. This is not, easy. This is not for the faint of heart, believe me. But what we're seeing, and we're feeling a turn right around now, and I've probably said that a few times over the past many years, but we really are seeing a change in how the industry is viewing all this and understanding all this, and are starting to feel the competitive pressure. And without that, they wouldn't do it, because what we're talking about often takes a lot of money. Now, one last thing, and I'll turn it back to you, but we're also developing a new way to pay for it, which will make it a lot easier, more plug and play, more easier. This is the beauty of technology, as you well know. You got to keep making it easier and easier to say yes, easier and easier to plug in. Get rid of all the complexity. If you guys ever listen to Acquired, it's a podcast. I'm listening to the one on Microsoft. They just kept making it easier and easier and easier until finally everyone had one. Microsoft was everywhere. IBM and Apple and all the rest, Compaq and all the, I'm only 2.5 hours into the 4.5 hour episode, but you get the idea. It takes a lot to make that sale. Now, they were on warp speed because it's just the nature of that time. We're in an industry that does not move quickly because of regulation, because of whatever else. There's a million reasons, but we're starting to see that, and this new pricing model that we're developing as we speak will just make it easier. We're taking the onus off the firms to try to build this stuff, make it easier for them to plug and play, and then we'll keep upgrading. So different pricing models. So it's far more affordable, which is always important. So this is all part of the evolution of how you create a category.
The other piece of the story that I'll add is, and I've only been here for 5 years, which in tech years is the equivalent of dog years. It's got to be like 60 years or something. So, but what I've noticed is a lot of companies, especially in financial services, want to stand up on a mountain and say, this is what I do, and tell the story yourself. But one thing that has become exponentially more clear to me, especially through interviewing people on our podcast and writing articles about them, it's that all these stories are significantly more effective when somebody else tells them. So when you get your clients and partners to tell their own story as to how they got so big and strong doing X, Y, and Z, and your company contributed to that, everyone wins so much more than us just coming out and saying, here's how we helped Morgan Stanley do X, Y, and Z. When we got a couple people from Morgan Stanley who actually built the platform, and Rose Palazzo and Eric Lordy, who was her counterpart at the time, coming on our podcast and telling the story, that was far more effective than us creating any content from our own perspective. So that was one of the first times we were able to execute that playbook. But if you look up and down the episodes of WealthTech on Deck, you will see a repeat strategy of us featuring our clients and prospects, frankly, on our show, getting them to tell their story. And it becomes, if we're not already involved in the story, if we are, we benefit significantly. But if we're not, it just becomes more clear as to how we can fit into their process. So you don't tell, my takeaway from that is, don't stand on the soapbox yourself and do all the preaching. Work on cultivating the community through the people who use your software and the people who are your heroes, and create heroes out of them. And they love you more because you're able to do that, and you benefit significantly more because they are singing your song to whoever asks them about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So guys, this has been really excellent. Let's shift gears a little bit, because I think that the fun thing I've been able to observe through my friendship and our professional relationship over the years is just how much you guys are never sitting on your hands. You're always working through and figuring out how to solve another thing and another thing and another thing. There's like a lack of people in creative work in our space. There's a lot of creative people, but there's not a lot of people that are like truly in creative work day to day to the degree that you two guys are in particular. I think it'd be helpful to get some kind of advice. Like, if you were starting a new wealth tech company or brand, what are the most essential things that people need to keep in mind in 2024? Like, what are the things that people need to know from two people that are very much in the arena every day? I'd be curious to hear what you guys would say.
Well, I'll handle the story part, and Matt can handle the more technical part, because he knows that we kind of complement each other that way, as you may have figured out. So I mentioned the book I wrote called Authentic and Ethical Persuasion. It's all about listening. And so I've spent the past 4 decades listening. I'm not always perfect by any means, just ask my wife, but I work at it every single day in every conversation. So to anyone that's starting anything, whether it's in our world or any other world, that's always my advice. And I teach at Babson College, which is not far from where I live outside of Boston. And I teach undergrad and MBA students a course in authentic and ethical persuasion. It's all about listening and storytelling. That's what the book is about. That's what the class is about. And actually, we're doing some pretty interesting work coming up around that. But I've been doing it over the past 10 years, and it's a lot of fun for me. And it's a reminder. Frankly, I do it. One of the primary reasons I do it is just a reminder. In fact, I wrote the book during the pandemic. I had some time on my hands, and also it sort of reminded me. And ever since that, it reminds me to keep listening. So when I'm talking to a very senior executive at any of these big firms I mentioned, I mostly say to myself, "Shut up and listen. Just shut up." Shut up. That's what I'm saying to myself. And I'm listening. I'm doing both. Because my tendency is, I listen to so many of these folks, and they're so smart that I frankly know more than most people, just because I listen. Not a lot more, and I listen intently. I listen in a deep way, and I'm listening for their pain points, their issues, their challenges, what they're doing about it. So if you're starting anything, and I say this to my sons, a couple of them are in startup situations, listen, pay attention. And so the other piece to that, the podcast has been wonderful in that way because I get to ask and it's legit. So it's part of the deal. It's why we're there. And I also have come to learn through the podcast that I keep saying, so really, that's interesting. Tell me more. Now, why do you think that is? I go deeper and deeper. And what ends up happening, not unlike what you've done here, Judd, it brings out that good stuff. You know what I mean? That creativity, that thoughtfulness. And so I do that for sure on the podcast. And I invite people, it's not always wealth tech per se, but it's people that are around the wealth tech world. I think of a good friend of mine, John Connors, who has a digital agency outside of Boston, one of the smartest people I know. And we could say with all the stuff he's doing with AI and a whole bunch of things, there's a reason for him. But I just make sure I spend time with him. I find excuses to hang out with him, to listen to him. And I find many others. Judd, you're on that list. And I have many others, many you know, many you may not know. But I'm always listening, trying to learn, trying to get better. And frankly, it's inspiring. It gets the juices flowing. It gets us. And then we keep refining and tinkering to make sure that we're getting that much better. An example, I just reached out to you, Judd, a week or 2 or 3 ago. I forget. I said, I'm worried we're overexposed. And your advice is, no, don't worry about it. You're doing fine. But I just want to make sure. I want to make sure we're on point for our audience, always telling a story that advances the industry. Because if we keep advancing the industry, I know LifeYield's going to be fine. Matt, you got a different version of what I just said.
I think you set the table perfectly, though, on that. So I'll give like three main pieces here. That's 4 fingers. 3 main pieces here that pull this all together. And number one, what I took from Jack's answer mostly was know your audience. And the more marketing and things that we do at LifeYield, the more different ways that our technology can be used and implemented, the more important I'm finding this piece of information is. You can have a great idea, but if your audience doesn't understand how it works or what it is, then you have a bigger problem on your hands than just making the sale of your product. You have a way of thinking or process to completely gut before you're even able to sell your product. So know your audience, do as much research on them as possible, get in as deep as possible with them, and with knowing your audience comes networking with your audience and actually talking to them. And we're blessed to now have our podcast to be able to have a mechanism for talking to all these different firms. But without that, I think it would really just be Jack's reputation that we're using to go hand-to-hand combat and try and get information from people. So,
hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Could I interrupt here? I just want to highlight the real value of the podcast. It's the best marketing tool, best prospecting tool I've ever used. I can get into any door just about. I haven't gotten in every door, but I've gotten in pretty much all of them, but 2 or 3 through the podcast. So because people want to tell their story. People want to be heard. People want to be acknowledged, recognized. And then they hear their peers. So it's sort of self-fulfilling. So I just want to highlight the podcast may sound like it's about advancing the industry, and it totally is, but it's also the best prospecting tool I've ever encountered. Matt, back to you.
It's the best networking that, like, I've been blessed through COVID and into now that to be able to meet so many influential people within the industry. I'm kind of taken along for the ride in Jack's sidecar, but I'm so down to be Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan in this in this endeavor that we have, because I get to meet so many amazing people. And what it's allowed us to do is get to know our audience better and network with the audience that we want to get in with. And that networking has helped us to plant seeds and create that category. The last thing I'll say is where real marketing and the execution comes into play is once you know your audience and have networked in with a bunch of them, so they're connected with you on LinkedIn or whatever social media platform you plan on using, pick one channel that your audience is on and go full force into that singular channel at first. Because as someone who prides themselves on being up to date with all the different marketing tactics, strategies, channels that are all happening, it's so easy to be like, oh, I need to be on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and have a newsletter and have a podcast. But in reality, like, you just can't do all those things. Like, we're a team of 4 people and we barely have enough time to do all the 3 or 4 different channels that we've picked are the ones we're going to conquer. So I would say, don't try and be on every channel at once. Pick one and go full force at that one. If LinkedIn is your channel, which for us, it's the main social media channel that we determine is where our buyers and the people we want to network in with are, we don't really do social media on Facebook or X or whatever the platform of the day is, because for us, it doesn't pay to be spread that thin. We focus all of our energy on making sure that our LinkedIn content is good. You know, we have a whole process that we've developed that includes you guys at Turncast to help us create that level of notoriety on our one channel. And then once we were able to create our podcast and have our singular distribution channel of LinkedIn is only when we said, all right, let's build a newsletter around this. And now that we've been able to create a good process for podcasting, for our newsletter, and then for building bylines around all of these topics and more in addition to that, you know, we wouldn't have been able to create those different levels of marketing without focusing on one channel at a time and making that good. Otherwise, we would have just been spread really thin over a bunch of different things, and everything would have just been a little more watered down. So, you know your audience. Use your marketing content to network in with them and create opportunities for you to collaborate with the people you want to get known with, and then pick one channel and go full force at it.
I'll add one little piece. When we do the bylines, it's chock full of links to our podcast. And when we do our newsletter, it's chock full of links to the bylines and to the podcast. So wherever you go, when you're reading our content, it's easy to find the content you want. And what we're doing with wealthtech on .com, it's just gotten started the past month. But we're going to have plenty of ways that you're going to be able to find the content that serves you. To your earlier point, Judd, we'll make sure that if you want to know about certain topics, that we're going to make that part of how you can access it. You know, just that's all part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it easy for you to get smart, because our guests are smart and they have something to say, and just got to make it easy to find it.
Awesome. Well, this has been really good, guys. Thank you so much for taking time with us. I'm so excited to watch the LifeYield story continue to develop, and you guys are excellent storytellers. It's inspiring to watch, the way that you are continuing to craft your narrative and listening to people and guiding the market that's developing here. So thank you so much for spending time with us on the Rising Tide, and appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jed.